Bill here with the Metals Minute. Today is Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. Well, the inflation numbers are in. Both the CPI and the PPI are higher. And the PPI is the Producer Price Index, and that's the amount that manufacturers and producers, internal costs they have to produce the things that consumers purchase. So CPI is an indication of what is inflation right now. PPI hints at what might inflation be to the consumer in the months ahead. And so what we're seeing is a pattern that has been developing over the past, this is 2.5 years now. We've seen inflation build. Last year's inflation was higher than the year before. We have the second half of this year higher than the first half, and this month's core inflation was higher than this quarter's average. So it's continued to build, and the producer price inflation shows us that there's more inflation to come. And so that's probably why we had the reaction on Wall Street yesterday. Incidentally, we have major bond indexes at all-time lows. So we have seen not only stocks performance this year in the tank, but bonds have had their worst year in history. So silver, for an example, year-to-date, silver is the worst performer among the metals, down 13.5%. Year-to-date, it's still higher, performing better than even bonds. So, and precious metals as a sector is doing much better than the alternatives. Palladium's over 18% year-to-date. So while everything else is not looking good, metals are, relatively speaking, are holding their own and a good place to be going forward. And we see that manifesting in the current inflation picture. Many are saying, as we mentioned earlier this week, that unemployment is going to have to go much higher, go up to around 6%, 6.5%, to ever hope to see the target Fed rate for inflation back down to 2%. So that involves more layoffs. We've had 50% of companies surveyed announce that they're expecting hiring reductions, freezes, and layoffs over this year. And Goldman Sachs just announced they're cutting back on staffing this year, and profits are down for them. And so we're seeing that across the board. So it's getting interesting. Now, some have asked about the COLA as well. And you can find stories on the internet, them talking about next year's cost of living allowance going up by 10%, 11%. I don't see that at all. I think our base case will be around 8.5. That's on the low side. That's the range. On the high side, it would be 9. So that's the range realistically that we're going to see. And factoring in this month's CPI puts it right at 8.7, but we still don't know how September is going to come out. So I'm saying on the low side 8.5, and on the high side probably 8.9. So right in that range is likely where we'll see the actual COLA for 2023 come in. And I'm not sure why others are offering more rosy numbers. They must be looking at different numbers. But the ones that the COLA is based on, what those numbers are telling us is that it will be between 8.5 and 8.9 most likely for next year. Thank you for tuning in. We have a longer article coming out this week in which you can plug in your own numbers of things that you purchase and see what your personal CPI is. And we did that last night, and it turns out ours is over 17%. And that matches other metrics such as shadow stats talking about how inflation used to be calculated. Used to be more realistic than it is now. And another metric is called the Chapwood Index. And those were always statistical anomalies compared to the official numbers. But it's interesting to see what your personal CPI is when you punch in your own spending habits and services you typically use. And like I say, ours was much closer to the shadow stats number than to the official number. Thanks for tuning in. That'll be in a longer article this week. Feel free to check it out and see what your personal CPI is.